Welcome, everyone. I hope you're ready for this. Thank you to my guests Booze and Booze in the darkest hour for helping me bring you over an hour of true scary stories. I'm always looking to hear your experiences, so if you have a story you'd like me to read in an upcoming video, please send it to the email in the description. Now on to the stories. Happened to me when I was 9 years old, but I still remember it so vividly. I lived at the time in the Blackpool in a modest 4-bedroom house. The area itself was good with very little crime or concern until that night. I shared a bedroom with my brother. We had bunk beds and I was on the top bunk. The bedroom was on the first floor at the rear of the property. My bedroom overlooked the back garden. One night I was awoken by the sound of a window lock being tried. I opened my eyes and looked towards the bottom of the bed, which faced the 4 large windows. To my horror, someone was outside, perched on the window ledge, attempting to get in through my window. I froze in horror, not daring to allow them to see I was awake. I remember sliding back down into my bed, keeping as still as possible. I was there for no more than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. My heart was beating that loudly. I was sure it would give me away. With my eyes closed, I stayed still, listening to them shuffle across to the next window. Unlike before, I could now hear a screwdriver or something in his hand, which was being used a little more forcibly to get in. Without moving, I opened one eye ever so slightly to see whether I could make out who this person was. A security light at the back of the property suddenly triggered mid-look. I panicked. Surely now he'd seen me. Now he knew I was there. Staring back at me was a dark figure, black clothes, wearing a matching balaclava, only his eyes on show. This horrible, startled, piercing look. Clearly having been caught off guard by the security light, he froze and just stared. He didn't move an inch. I was now set up, equally as stunned. Staring back, locked by fear, I immediately jumped off the top of my bunk. There wasn't time for the stairs. I screamed for my parents as I ran out of the room and into theirs. They tried convincing me it was a bad dream and told me to get back into bed. There was absolutely no chance of that happening. And after a couple of minutes they agreed to go and investigate. Nobody was there. They had gone. I got back into bed, still almost frozen with fear. What if he had gotten in? He might be in the room right now. He could comfortably fit in my wardrobe or even under the bed. My brother, who was 6 years my junior, had slept through the whole episode and was no use looking down my bed toward the window again. I noticed the latch on the 4th window. It had been left open on the inside. A simple pull from outside would have easily opened it. I shut my eyes and remember silent tears falling down my cheeks. If he was in the room and knew I was awake, he might harm me. To keep me quiet, pretending to be asleep seemed the best option, and eventually I must have nodded off. I was woken up the next day by the sound of my cat outside screeching in the garden. Daylight came through the windows, and the bedroom didn't feel anywhere near as scary as the night before. Cautiously, I walked toward my bedroom window. I noticed marks around the window, locks from the outside where the paint had been scraped, and it wasn't a bad dream. My cat screeched again, and I heard a commotion outside below me in the garden. 3 police sniffer dogs were parading around. A police officer was stood talking to my mom. I rushed outside, but was quickly ushered back into the house. I was told to take the cat indoors. Look on my mom's face, I knew she was trying to hide something from me. The ambulance, which arrived a short while later, gave it all the way. Apparently, it turned out someone had broken into the next door house through the back bedroom windows. The motive, well, it appeared to have been a simple theft, but the elderly lady who came across the intruder had been found dead at the bottom of her stairs. The police never found out who it was. But then again, they never dusted our windows for prints, as my story was never told. We left the house and moved away within 6 months. I still think they felt guilty for not listening to me and not acting differently. Even to this day, my parents don't wish to talk about it whenever I try and bring it up. Story 2. I'm a female at the time of my tale. I was 27 years old. I was living with my boyfriend, now fiancé, in the same home we live in today. Our home is a small beach cottage with multiple windows on all sides. The home was moved in the 70s from a rural beach town just a few miles from here to our quaint neighborhood amongst sprawling brick ranches, in what I imagine at the time to be a desirable little working-class neighborhood on the edge of town. Around the time of my story, my boyfriend would make frequent trips out of town, often for work, but also on occasion to assist his older parents who lived out of state with their home repairs, remodeling, and all that. He'd typically be gone for a few weeks, but up to 2 months at a time. At this point, he'd been out of town for a week or so. I was going about my day-to-day life. Like normal, going to work at my 9 to 5, working out in the evening chores. Rinse and repeat. One night, I was laying in bed on the cusp of my sleepy melatonin stupor, when suddenly I was jolted wide awake with an overwhelming feeling to get up and check that all the windows were locked. I thought it was a strange impulse. Other than the fact that I hadn't checked the window since my boyfriend had left, I had no rational reason to think of the windows right then. No strange sounds, nothing of that nature. I begrudgingly drug myself from my cozy cocoon to check the windows. Most were locked up tight, but there were a few that had been left unlocked. I threw the lock latches that had been left unsecured and groggily stumbled back to bed, not thinking anything else about it, as I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, as usual, I woke up to the cringe-inducing alarm blaring from my phone, and I began readying myself for work. I started the water kettle for my beloved French press and stood at my kitchen window waiting for the whistle. My entire body was instantly coated in goosebumps as I noticed a single slice in my kitchen window screen. Utterly shocked, I ran to the office, then to the guest room, to the laundry room, and as I'm sure you've already guessed, dear listener, every screen in my home had a single slice in it. A slice just large enough to fit a hand through. All but 3 screens out of 18 windows in my house had been sliced. The 3 that were left untouched were the windows to my bedroom, the bedroom that I peacefully slept in while someone attempted to get in. By this time, my kettle was screeching at me to remove it from the heat. I ran shaking to the kitchen to answer the kettle's call while attempting to not kill over from the second heart attack I was having before I'd even dressed. I was freaking out beyond measure. The cops were called and a detective came out to investigate. On the backside of my house, he noticed a single handprint on one of the windows. He tested for fingerprints and determined that the person attempting to get in was wearing gloves. He of course had no proof, but he also believed that the person must have known I was in that room. Nothing ever came of the investigation. I can't explain why I got out of bed that night, but now I will forever trust my God. Story 3, read by The Darkest Hour. I work at a big-name retail company in the United States. I've been at my store going on 9 years now, so as you can imagine, I have a good amount of friends who work in the building. This story happened about 3 years ago, before I became manager, but pretty far into my career in the building. During the holiday season, we hire on a lot of seasonal team members. Some stay, some go. Amongst the new faces in the building was a younger guy named Matt. For his age, Matt had an amazing work ethic, going as far as to ski into work during a bad snowstorm rather than call out. I was told that he was an Eagle Scout member of the Honor Society all through school. He was a weird kid loner type, but he seemed to take to me pretty quickly. The department I worked in was towards the back of the store, and he was a backroom team member, so we saw a lot of each other. We chatted about things like video games and comics. Mostly passing chatter. Have you played blank game yet? It's amazing. That type of thing. Before long, he was adopting my break schedules, mostly to bum cigarettes. Matt ended up staying after the season ended, so I had a pretty consistent smoke buddy. One morning in January, he asked if I knew someone named Jack. He went to the high school that I graduated from, but both Matt and Jack were considerably younger than me. I told him I didn't know him. Okay, he said, I was just asking because a friend asked me to deal with him. I'm kind of a protector in my circle, and he's been messing with her. I brushed it off, mostly just surprised by the fact that he had friends outside of his work bubble. The next day, he came to me again, talking about Jack. I figured out where he lived, but there's so many cars in his driveway. I'm not sure which one is his. I need to be sure he's home, or if I do something, it's got to be to his car. This sketched me out a bit, but being a semi-sane person, I assumed he was going to pull a childish prank. Still, I lied. Be careful in that area. My dad lives there, and there's been a lot of vandalism. Most homeowners have surveillance cameras out front. He didn't seem fazed by my statement and switched the conversation to the then new Zelda game. About a month or so it passed with no new inquiries or comments about Jack or his mission. I was relieved. I showed up to work as usual. Around 9:45, I took my smoke break. Matt usually worked later, so my first break was a solo one that day. He'd covered a shift. I was surprised when he followed me out and asked for a cigarette. I gave it to him and sat down to enjoy my break. So I finally got that kid the way he said it. It sent a chill down my spine. Oh, okay. I beat Zelda last night. It's a good game, you should get it. I tried to change the subject, but I could see that he was going to continue talking. Do you know what ricin is? I admit I hadn't, so I shook my head. I wish I could say that I still don't. For those of you who also don't know, from what I'm told, ricin is a particularly deadly poison with no scent or taste that when ingested can be lethal within 3 days. Not a Breaking Bad fan, I guess. I shook my head again. But by then he was already rattling off on how to make it and what it did. It's lethal, odorless, and tasteless, no antidote either. I put it on a scratch and sniff card and I walked it to his house last night. His birthday was recently, so he shouldn't be surprised by it. Right away a million thoughts rushed into my head. I come from a large, close family. If I had a card in my mailbox and addressed without a return address on it, I know for a fact that one of my siblings or parents, they would have opened it. As much as I wanted to believe that he was just trying to sound like a badass, I couldn't bring myself to leave that chance. I pretended I hadn't heard him, continued my Zelda talk, and headed back. Once inside, I alerted my direct superior and I sat in an office to call the police. 2 plain-clothed detectives came in shortly after and questioned me pretty extensively. They agreed that it was more than likely not true, but we're glad I reported it regardless, and then they were on their way. Matt worked through the rest of his shift and left with another backroom team member shortly after they left. The detectives returned the card that was in the mailbox. Had something in it, but they couldn't be sure what it was. It had to go to a lab for testing. They went to Matt's house and talked to him. He said that he had put powder in the card to try to scare him, and that was it. The next week was a bit crazy. The lab results came back positive for a particularly potent batch of ricin. Matt attempted to flee his home while a hazmat team knocked on the door. He hid the remaining poison in a storm drain close by, where it was quickly found. Matt was arrested, and I planned on getting back to my normal life. Not the case. News reporters and journalists were at my job, my home, in both of my parents' homes daily. I had to wear another girl's name badge just so they wouldn't know who I was, but they knew. They would come back to my department referring to me in third person and try to pet my ego. It didn't work. I had very clear directions to not discuss the incident. Besides, I wanted to be done with the whole situation. My now ex-boyfriend kicked me out because of the reporters and the police. I just wanted to go back to being normal. I met with the family of the would-be victim. The mother and father were very nice, thanking me and crying. The mom had painted me an angel as a thank you gift. And though I'm not religious, I've held on to it. The brother was a paraplegic with a seizure disorder. He couldn't take care of himself at all. The sister, who was opening the mailbox as the police called the house, was a 2-time cancer survivor. And Jack, the eldest, was there with his girlfriend. It turns out the reason Matt tried to kill Jack was because he was dating an ex of his. That's it. That's absolutely insane to me, but clearly this kid was not the most sane. I met with the family a few times for trial prep, all scheduled weeks in advance, all fairly redundant. Until one day, I got a call very late from a woman that I'd never talked to before. She was with the Victims Protection Agency, and she needed to meet with me at the courthouse the following morning. I called off work and made my way up there. In the room was myself, the family, the original D.A and detectives, as well as a new D.A and a new set of detectives. They passed around a photocopy of a letter handwritten from Matt to another inmate who is due to be released soon. I can't remember exactly what was written, but there were very graphic, disturbing plans for each of us. He offered up a trust fund that we're pretty sure didn't exist if another inmate did things like kidnap our families and burn them on our lawns while we watched from inside the house, remove our tongues and eyelids, and force us to drink bleach. There was a distinct plan for each of us, but like I said, I don't remember most of it. He's since been sentenced and sent upstate. His trial seemed to go on forever, finally ending a few months ago. I don't think he's been charged for the second case, the threatening letters to the other inmate. Not just yet, but I'm not supposed to go to those trials, so I may never know. Anyways, Eagle Scout, if and when you're free, let's not meet again. Music. This happened in late August, early story for September 2012. As a child, my biggest fear was someone breaking into my house. I don't know why, since I lived in a very wealthy and safe neighborhood where Break-ins very rarely happened, but this was my biggest childhood fear. Not the monster under the bed or a ghost in the closet, I was scared of a legit bad person breaking into my bedroom window. So a few months ago my boyfriend was working this terrible job at a bowling alley where he closed nearly every night, meaning he wouldn't get home from work until about 3:30 to 4 in the morning. I usually waited up for him because I had trouble sleeping alone, but on this one particular night I had work very early the following morning, so I had opted to go to bed. It was very creepy being in our apartment alone, and it took me a while to sleep. It's most eerie because we live on the first floor and our bedroom window is on the wall left of the front door. There are also a set of stairs not very far from our doorstep that lead to the upstairs apartments. This one night, it took me a little longer than usual to fall asleep, but I finally passed out at around 1:30 am. Close to 3 am, I kind of slowly come to consciousness as I hear the front door knob being turned. I initially got excited thinking it was my boyfriend finally home from work, and I started to get up to go meet him. I'm halfway out of bed when I realize the door isn't opening and I hear someone start cursing outside my window. I stopped to listen for a second thinking maybe I heard someone opening the door upstairs. I heard what sounded like someone trying to jimmy the door and then kick the wall, my bedroom wall right under my window, right next to where I was sitting. Looking back on this, I should have just called the cops right there, but my half-asleep mind wasn't so intelligent. I thought maybe my boyfriend had just forgotten his keys or something, so incredibly smart me decides to go check it out. So I get up, put on some pants and a hoodie, grabbed my phone and left my bedroom. My half-asleep mind, while being unintelligent, had a part that realized, oh, this is a bad idea, because I stopped in the kitchen to grab a knife and headed in my hoodie. I slowly opened the front door and at first I didn't see anyone, so I started to close the door, but then this older guy walked back around the corner. My mind was screaming that something was wrong the moment I saw him. He was probably in his 50s or so. He had wrinkly skin, white and gray hair, and a couple of teeth missing that I saw when he smiled at me. He was slightly bent over like he had a hunched back, and he was wearing her dirty t-shirt, ragged jeans, and carrying a black duffel bag. Hey, I have Yura, someone who lives with you, is with me. She's really tipsy and she said she needed her ride home. His voice low and raspy as he takes a hesitant step in my direction. My initial thought was my boyfriend's crazy drug-addicted ex-girlfriend was on a trip and thought she still lived here. I started to get pissed, but then I remembered she was still in jail, so that wasn't possible. As I'm trying to analyze the situation, he's stepping closer to me. I closed the door a little more and said, I'm sorry, no other woman besides myself lives here. What, this is 1142 Pendleton Lane, right? He didn't look like he believed me, and his voice was getting a hint of anger to it, which only frightened me more. Yes, but no other girl besides myself lives here. My voice sounded a lot more confident than I actually felt. Well, is there another Pendleton Lane? He's about 2 feet away from me at this point. I can smell his rancid breath, and I gotta look at this Christ look in his. I know there isn't. I'm getting really creeped out, and at this point I really am considering calling the police. The way he was protectively holding that black duffel bag told me it was bad news. In there, our conversation was pretty much going in circles for several minutes, and that's when I realized this guy wasn't just a little off, he was definitely not all right. Whether he was drunk or high, I didn't know, and frankly I didn't care. He was swaying slightly and still smiling creepily down at me. I wish I could describe the way he was smiling at me better, but there are no words, and it still gives me the chills. To this day, at this point, I'm getting really scared because he keeps gesturing to the woman in question, but I can't see her. She's not in my view at all, so I'm beginning to wonder if there even is someone with him, or if he tried to break in and was covering his ass with this story. I basically decide I'm done with this and go to close the door. When he turns and starts to talk to someone, I can't see. Hey man, is this the only 1142 Pendleton Lane? My boyfriend walks into view at this point. Yeah. He gives me the "Are you okay?" look, and I give him the "I'm terrified" look. He gets the message and slides into the space between the guy and myself, then pushed back so that he was standing in the doorway, and I was now in the apartment. The whole time my boyfriend is talking to Mr. Creepy, who eventually asks for a phone. My boyfriend tells him to wait a second so he can put his things down. We close the door, and my boyfriend tells Me he's going to go out there and that I need to call the police. However, he opened the door and the cop is already questioning the guy. Apparently someone else in the complex saw him driving around without any lights on, being sketchy, and they called the cops. The officer later told us that he asked the guy if he'd seen a black car. The guy replied to say that he had a black car. Turns out there was a woman really with him. She had lived at this address 6 years ago and had been evicted, but she never changed her driver's license. They'd been at a party and he tried to go home with her. We watched while the cops searched them and arrested them. They found straws and coke in the woman's purse and more straws in the guy's pockets. When we showed him the black bag that had been left near our door, the cop opened it up and found bricks of coke, and not long after that an ambulance had to be called as the woman was overdosing. She'd been passed out in the grass the whole time the guy was talking to me. The guy apparently was later to have been found to have a combination of coke, alcohol and meth in his system. Idiot. To this day, I still get the chills just thinking about it. That guy was high out of his mind. Probably had no idea what he was doing and could have done a lot of really bad things. I'm just thankful my boyfriend and the cops showed up when they did. Story 5. This story begins in 2011. I just turned 24 and with my cosmetology license I began working at a hair salon down the street from my apartment. I lived in a very wealthy suburban neighborhood on the water. I called it the sleepy beach town. Most nights I worked the front desk, closing with my co-worker Becky. Becky was a shy and reserved younger girl who would easily get embarrassed talking to customers. I, on the other hand, was very extroverted and took pleasure talking with anyone and everyone. The salon was divided 3 ways. There was a room to the left where the stylist cut and colored hair. The receptionist's desk was on the right when he first walked in, and behind it there was a wall between the desk and the back room reserved for guest waiting, spa treatments, and shampooing. I had to approach from the side to get behind the desk. It started off as a typical night at the salon. There were 2 stylists finishing up a couple clients in the stylist room, while I was busy training Becky on how to close out the cash register. The clock just turned 6:30 p.m. and it was already dark out when a man walked in. He was tall and a true silver fox with a full head of hair. He wore a black North Face fleece and he looked like your typical Pacific Northwest local. He asked me if he could take a seat and wait. This is not a weird request in the salon, since many women's husbands come to pick them up and wait until their wife's appointment is finished. I assumed this man was doing the same. 20 minutes passed and then he walked right up next to Becky and I behind the counter. He looked down at me and says, "I've been waiting but no one has showed up." I politely asked who he was waiting for and he replied, "You know." And he winks, "No sir, I do not. How can I help you? Are both of you over 18? He asked. "Excuse me. I have good money and I've been patiently waiting. Now I'm getting irritated. I want my massage and I want it now." Fear had crept over me since he started standing there, especially because he had his hand in his pocket and because he was hovering over me in an area with no escape. And then I noticed the handle of a knife sticking out of his fleece and the wristband of a medical patient ID. I signaled to Becky to call 911, but she had completely frozen. I told the man he needed to come to the front of the counter if he wanted me to begin his appointment. He slowly sauntered to the front of the counter, then he leans in and softly says to me, "I like that dark shade of lipstick you're wearing. Will you be wearing it?" For me, that was when I grabbed the phone and made it very apparent I was calling 911. I quickly began giving a full description of him, including the wristband I had noticed. He turned around and left out the front. I had this weird feeling that he wasn't done yet, and so I locked the entry door. A few moments later he came running up, stopped and stared into my eyes. His eyes looked empty and careless with rage as he began punching the front door. He slowly turned and quietly started walking away. While this was going on, I told everyone to remain calm and said that it was being handled. Thankfully, the cops showed up immediately and detained him. The officer had explained to me that the man had escaped the psychiatric hospital a few towns over and he was looking for a happy ending massage parlor. During our weekly team meeting, the owner of the salon told me that what I did was not protocol and that if it were to happen again, to get an adult to help. I left that salon shortly after and I'm very happy with my career change into real estate so far. Story 6 read by Booze and Booze. A little over a year ago, my fiancé and I sold our house in the city and moved an hour away to a rural town. We got an amazing deal on our home, which is pretty rare in today's market, and have been enjoying our quiet new life oceanside. Our home is just off the highway and sits on an acre of land. We have a neighbor on either side of us, but the properties are lined by trees and a river, so it's pretty private. There's nobody directly across from us, and beyond our backyard is the ocean. It's also important to note that our driveway was probably about 100 feet long, so anyone who comes to the door is either invited or Amazon. When we first moved in, we were getting weird vibes from the neighbor on the right. A few times we saw him watching us through his attic window that looks down onto our back deck. He would also emerge from the bushes and stand beside the gate to our fence that leads to the ocean. Overall, he seemed weird but mostly harmless, but just to be sure, we installed the front porch cam on the front door just in case. My fiancé doesn't like to leave any lights on at night at all. Not even a porch light. This never bothered me, though the porch cam we installed has night vision and the picture is pretty clear at night, so if anyone came up to our door in the middle of the night, we would be able to see them very clearly. The camera has an app that sends notifications to our phone when motion is detected. You can also watch the camera on live view and talk to people outside. One night we decided to go to bed early because we weren't feeling well. We did the usual, turned off all the lights and headed to bed with our 3 dogs. It was only 9 p.m., but it was winter, so it was pitch black outside, the only light coming from a few solar lights we have on our steps and the street light at the end of the driveway. We were dozing off when I heard a noise. I thought I was hearing things because none of the dogs reacted. Typically one will hear a noise and start barking, and then the other 2 join in. I asked my fiancée if she heard anything and she said no. Then I heard it again and instantly I knew someone was at our door. Panicked, I told my fiancée to open the porch camera app and check the live view while I flicked the lamp on. She started off by telling me that if someone was there she would have gotten a notification. She picked up her phone and turned the screen on. There it was, motion detected. We exchanged a confused look and my heart jumped into my throat when she opened the live view. Standing on her porch was a young woman with no pants on. She was wearing a puffy jacket and had her shoes slipped on so that the heels of her shoes were crushed underneath her feet, like she left somewhere in a hurry. She had opened our screen door and was knocking repeatedly on the entry door while staring towards the road. She then lifted her gaze towards her cars and then tried to peek through the stained glass on her entry door. Fiancé decided that this woman was trafficked and escaped her captors and needed our help. I didn't say a word. I just sat there watching this woman knocking on my door. I wasn't getting the same feeling my fiancé was. This didn't look like a woman in distress to me. Her behavior was strange and felt sinister. My fiancé threw on a sweater and was making her way to the bedroom door. I asked her, "Where the hell you think you're going?" And she replied she needs our help. I don't know how I convinced her to stay in the bedroom, but I did. It felt weird to call the police because of someone at your door, but because she appeared to have no pants on, my gut told me to, so I called 911 after I got off the phone with dispatch. We checked the camera again and she was gone. 20 minutes later an officer called me, and she thanked me profusely for calling and letting me know that they had found the woman walking along the highway. I felt like the wind was knocked out of me, for when she proceeded to tell me that the woman now has pants on and was accompanied by mail, the officer further explained that the pair said that they were looking to use a phone. I explained to the officer that we have the whole thing on camera and there is no male in the picture, which leads us both to conclude that he was likely hiding behind one of our cars or in the bushes beside the steps. I also explained that we don't leave any lights on, so if someone was looking to use a phone, why would they choose the house that's pitch black? The officer agreed that they were likely up to no good and again thanked me for calling. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since. I'll never know the true intent of the pantsless woman and her hidden partner, but my gut tells me that's a good thing. Music. Story 7. I was probably 6 years old, give or take a year, and I was on my way home with my mother. I was sitting in the passenger seat of our old Astrovan and my mom was driving. We're only about a mile away from home and we're stopped at a red light when I noticed that my mom has been acting weird. She was obviously anxious, if not a little scared, and in my mind I remember thinking that it must have been something I'd done, so I ask her what's wrong and I try to apologize. She gives me a nervous smile and assures me everything is fine. But that's when I notice her giving an uncomfortable sideways glance at the car. next to us. That's when I knew that something was really wrong. It was just something about the way she looked at the old boxy brown sedan next to us that sent shivers down my spine, despite her reassuring that nothing was amiss. I could just tell that it was a lie. So the light finally changes after what felt like eons, and my mom floors it like our lives depend on it. That's when I notice the creepy car is flooring it too. I'm starting to get really uneasy as my mom is one of the slowest, safest drivers I've met. This is completely out of her character. My mom is coming up to one of the turns into our neighborhood fast. She makes a hard right without losing much speed. Somehow the creeper still managed to get behind us and took the turn as well. Now I'm really panicking. Keep in mind that this is a 25-mile-per-hour residential street. My mom's doing at least 70 through the twisting road that leads into the little suburb sect dead-end part of the neighborhood that we live in. I remember the look of horror in her eyes as this creep is keeping up with us, turn for turn, and I know she had to be scared shitless that she might hit someone as well. We come up to the turn that leads down our street, so my mom practically slams on the brake as she skids into our neighborhood. I remember physically shaking at this point because I was doing my best to grip the handle above the door and hold on tight, but my jittering limbs were doing their best to stop me. What happens next sticks with me the most, and I'm so thankful for it ending like it did that I did tear up thinking about it to this day. I think my mom's plan was to either try to get my dad, or if that failed, to flip around in one of the cul-de-sacs on our street in an attempt to lose him, but I'm not really sure because what happened next is amazing. One of my neighbors at the time happened to be a cop. He was one of the nicest guys, and he had a son around my age that I frequently played with. To our surprise and delight, he just happened to be outside that day playing catch with his aforementioned son. My mom immediately pulls in front of his house and starts yelling for him to please come over. He obliged and asks us with a smile what was so wrong that we had to pull over on the wrong side of the road, but as soon as he saw panic on her face, his smile dropped and he became visibly concerned. My mom starts explaining the situation, and I'm facing toward her listening to the conversation. He explained that since he's off duty, there's not much that he can do, but he will call for help and stay with us. As we were talking to him, we hadn't realized a couple of things. One, that my window was open, and two, that the creeper had pulled up next to us. You can probably put two and two together, but the next thing I remember is the look of understand my neighbor had on his face and my mom's banshee scream. I turned around and see a hairy pale arm reaching through the window and grasping for me. That was the first and last time I really saw him, and it was awful. He had big Coke bottle glasses, greasy, unkempt dark hair, and the creepiest 70s porno mustache I've ever seen. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and he had on khaki shorts. He was tall because he wasn't even leaning that much to get his arm into the van. And overall, you just look like a pretty messed up dude. I take this all in a matter of seconds. I hear my neighbor say, "Now I can do something," as he goes into cop mode and bolts to the other side of the car. Simultaneously, my mom is rolling the window up on this weirdo's arm with one hand while pulling me towards her with the other. I'm just sitting there wide-eyed and in complete shock. My neighbor used his skills to apprehend the guy, and shortly after more cops showed up. My mom and I were escorted into our neighbor's house, where his wife gave us something to drink and let us calm down. I remember his son came up to me at this point and asked if I could play. I was still shaking and in some weird, almost catatonic state, so I just shook my head no, much to his dismay. I'm not really sure whatever happened to the guy. I never heard much about it, but I do know that he went to court. However, the outcome of that is unknown to me. I can only hope they locked him up for a while. I did ask my mom some years later why she was initially freaked out by her, because I didn't really understand at the time. Apparently, she had first noticed him when we were at another stoplight. He had one hand down his pants and making other sexual gestures, said her and me. So that's why she panicked. I'm just thankful this story has a happy ending, because who knows what lengths this weirdo would have taken to continue following us. At least we learned that if something like this were to happen again, we could always stop at a police or fire station or something like that. So please stay safe out there, guys. Oh, and creepy 70s porn stash guy, let's not meet again. Music. So I live in a compound and we have a story 8 read by Booze and Booze gym in the community. I used to go at 2 a.m. 6 times a week. One day this guy walks in and starts working out at the end of my session. He says if I needed any gym advice I should ask him, which was weird because he's really skinny. Well, you can tell I've been gymming for a really long time. I didn't think much of it until a few days later he appears again around the same time. For a whole year I've never seen him come at this time, and then he starts talking to me during my workout and we exchanged Instagram accounts. I really didn't think much of it at all. Maybe he recently moved into this compound and wants to meet new people. That same day he messaged me saying I see some good chest progress, which I replied thank you, I appreciate it, and again didn't think much of it. For the next 3 weeks he would try to initiate outings and gymming together, which I definitely wasn't interested in. So I avoided him and changed my gym time, so once I went to the gym at 9 p.m. and he was already there, I was kind of forced to have a conversation with him afterwards for about 10 minutes. He then says let's go for a coffee, which I declined, saying my friends are waiting for me online, and I could see a disappointed look in his face. A few days later he was driving into the compound and saw me walking back home, so he honks the car and initiates another conversation right outside my house. He talked about his uni work and how busy he is, as I cut the conversation saying it's too humid, I'm going inside the next day. He walks into the gym a few seconds after I did. We would then chat about random stuff, one of them being how I'm buying these LED lights on Amazon. And slowly he started talking about praying in the religion and why I think about it and whether I pray. I said I do have a relationship with God and I pray in my own way, and he just kept repeating some of my sentences, sighing right after. So weird, just put in my headphones and I said I'll listen to music. I could tell he was doing random workouts as if to wait for me to be done. He catches up to me as I'm leaving and started talking about the car parked outside of my house and how I should see his car one day, which I agreed to. Literally the next day he calls me 3 times, which I don't pick up until the next day where he called and I picked up in case I see him in the gym, which I was preparing to go to. I told him I was busy that day. He said it's okay, I just wanted to tell you I left you some LED lights on your car. I couldn't relax until I made sure I gave them to you, which I replied you don't have to. I don't want them, as he kept insisting and saying it's nothing. Everything that's happened before this moment seemed weird but not creepy. During the phone call I felt so uneasy that I almost hung up and blocked his number as he was becoming really obsessive. He then said what are you up to, which I replied not much, I might go to the gym later. Oh cool, I'm just doing some studying and researching some stuff. So I said alright man, enjoy, and hung up. I went around my whole house making sure all the doors and windows are completely shut, locked them, and then headed to the gym, and bam, he was there. We said hi to each other and I put my earphones on and completely avoided him until I was finished. He followed and said hey, you want to see my car now, which I said sure. The whole building is covered with 24/7 surveillance, so I just went and then saw his car in the basement floor, and as we got to it he looked back at another tenant who had just arrived with a weird look. Then he looked back at me and said well, this is my car. I said oh cool, because I started stepping away. He then started talking about his bike and how he wrecked it, which was next to his car, as if to get me back closer to the car. So I said alright, well, I'll see you. He then said wait, let me walk you home, which I then refused as he gave me another weird look. I forgot to mention this guy's presence on Instagram is super weird. He just posts about cars and selfies from up to a year ago. Nothing really about him before then, no name, no age, and he told me he is 18. I don't have any idea how to act. Do I block this person and tell them I don't want to communicate with him? Do I stay in contact with him to make sure they don't pull some weird Since they know where I live, I call authorities. I'm just sitting at home feeling constantly like I'm being watched. Any advice and respect for my best friend whose life was a mess as a child. Story 9. I've been keeping this story inside for a very long time. I'm gonna be completely honest. I've never even spoken a word to my mother before. At first it was fear of getting social services involved. I guess too long had passed and I figured she never really would benefit any from knowing. This all happened when we were 11 years old. I'm 29 now. It all sort of feels like a surreal dream. When I was in elementary school I was an awkward child. I have high functioning autism, and while my grades were great my social functioning was lackluster. This left me with a fairly small, very colorful group of friends. 2 of the closest being Jessie and Katie. I came from a fairly overprotective household. My mother watched me like a hawk, and thus I was a naive kid. I didn't really understand that a lot of the oddness and dysfunction that would come out of my 2 friends had to do With problems at home, we were never allowed at Katie's house. I think her mom was extremely overweight, to the point of hardly being able to move, and she was embarrassed of it. Jessie's house, however, was only a few blocks away from the school we ended up. There a lot. Her parents were divorced, and her mom was deaf and mute. My mom and her would communicate through notes when I would go over, and while she at first would always seem slightly erratic, there were no real red flags when we first started going. Jessie's mom was living with her boyfriend, as well as her boyfriend's parents. Everyone in the household was deaf, with the exception of Jessie and her younger brother, but both of them had limited hearing. I think for the first year or so we were there, the boyfriend's parents kind of kept everything from getting too out of hand, but it was clear it was a dysfunctional household. After they moved out of the house, it was just Jessie's mom and her boyfriend. They would often lock us in the basement when I would spend the night, but the one time they forgot to lock it, we walked in on them shoving needles under the table. Again, we were too young to understand, but we did understand that we walked in on something bad. From this point on, we would be designated to spend our sleepover nights in our garage, as it was furnished with carpets and couches. The issue with this was Jessie's mom always kept the door locked so we wouldn't interfere with their activities again, so when one of us had to use the washroom, we would have to knock on the basement window until Jessie's little brother would hear and let us in through the basement window to pee. Another issue being he was hearing impaired. Thus sometimes it would take a literal hour of absolute banging on that window. We were young, and this felt as close to freedom as you could get. We didn't really understand why, or that it was wrong or dangerous for Jessie's mother to do this, so I never told my mom. It kept going on. One night, we were doing our normal sleepover, playing Pokemon Gold, trading and battling with link cables, and waiting for Jessie's mom to bring out the oven pizza she said she was cooking us literally hours ago. It was about midnight, and Katie said she really had to pee. She was trying to wait for Jessie's mom to bring in the pizza so she could go through the door, but she couldn't hold it. She goes out by herself to try to rouse Jessie's little brother Aaron. We're expecting it to take her a little while, but to our surprise she comes back extremely quick, locking the garage door behind her and latching the lift door. She looked really startled. She tells us that she was knocking to try to get Aaron's attention when she hears a rustle from the bush next to the gate going to the front yard. It takes her a minute to realize what she's looking at, but it's standing about 5 feet from the gate, 15 feet from the window Katie is at is a tall man dressed completely in black. She said it seemed like he just appeared out of the darkness, or like he was waiting for something. He asks her if she managed to lock herself out while slowly taking a step toward the gate. As she gets up and takes a step back, his pace quickens toward her and she sprints back to the garage. At first we thought she was just with us. We laughed and told her to stop around, and then we heard it hard twisting of the locked doorknob, then worse, the sound of scratching metal against the knob. He was trying to pick the lock. We stood in absolute fear for a moment, then grabbed the only pathetic things around we could use to try to defend ourselves. Then it just abruptly stopped. There were no windows in the garage, and no people on the door. We couldn't see what was going on. We waited for about 10 minutes, having no idea where this man was. If he was still out there where her mom was, or where that pizza had gotten to. But we were like sitting ducks in there. He'd clearly failed to pick the lock, but who knows if or what he would try next. Now this is stupid, but we were stupid. Scared children. We grabbed our weapons, which consisted of glorified sticks, and we left that garage. At first there was no sign of any man. We moved toward the downstairs window and started slamming on it, screaming and pleading for Aaron to open it again. That's when we heard it. It was in an almost sing-song mocking voice that rang out, "Well, hello again." 3 men, all in black. The one in the middle had spoken. They made a move forward. We once again spun it back to the garage. This time they just straight tried to kick in the door, all 3 of them stomping and kicking. It was close to giving in. And then everything stopped. Jessie's mother had come out the back door, pizza in hand, and startled them. She ran back inside, got her boyfriend and 2 of his other friends, and they were able to chase them off with some actual weapons, I'm guessing. The adults stayed in the backyard all night, weapons in hand. One person even sat on the roof with the compound. By the night turned into morning and it all settled down. We never stayed at Jessie's house for sleepovers after that. She was put into the care of her grandparents shortly after. It took me a really long time to actually grasp what happened that night, but considering they never called the police, I'm fairly sure we almost got literally murdered over some drug debt, Jesse's. Mother had I can't even imagine the evils that could have gone on that night if fate wasn't on my side. Something tells me those three men were way too happy to find children to take his penance, and it would hardly have just been a straightforward murder. It still makes me shudder.